Okay. Well, one of the problems of revising courses is that when you teach the course the second time, for the first time in several years, you don't quite know how long each class is going to be, what you're going to cover. So I'm hoping to complete the Republic in this first hour. I may not. So I may have to go into the second hour on the Republic when I was hoping to talk about Augustus. But we'll just see how we go along with this. Well, this is technically the architecture and art of the Roman Republic, part 3. I want to start off by making it clear to all of you that until the very end of the 3rd century BC, we've got no evidence that the Romans had any interest in or appreciation of what we would call the visual arts. The visual arts, things that you go to look at or things that you can see and enjoy looking at. A painting, a sculpture or something like that. Visual arts, something that's made to be seen, to be enjoyed. And there's no evidence at all until the late 3rd century BC that the Romans had any interest or appreciation of the visual arts. We actually find Roman writers of this period going down even to the 1st century BC, stressing that this is very un-Roman. You know, it's only weak people, simple-minded people like the Greeks and the Persians who were interested in art. And we see this attitude expressed in this practice of deditio. Whenever a Roman general went out to conquer another group of people in Italy or somewhere else, then the idea was to bring back the works of art, the things that they really liked, to put it on display at Rome, statue or painting, jewellery, whatever it was, basically dedicate it to the gods and use this as proof, in a sense, that people who were interested in the visual arts really weren't very clever, strong, they were weak, they deserved to be conquered. That was very much the Roman attitude. But what we begin to see towards the end of the 3rd century BC, going into the 2nd century BC, Rome is beginning to expand its control over the Mediterranean world. It's coming into contact with other peoples, and in particular the Greeks, or rather the Greek-speaking peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean. We start to see a beginnings of an appreciation of the visual arts in a sense. And we can see a change in attitude, a distinct change in attitude in 211 BC, after Marcus Claudius Marcellus captures Syracuse, one of the most important cities on Sicily, Greek city there. He took back the usual collection of paintings and sculptures. These were dedicated to the gods of Rome. But according to Plutarch, now Plutarch is writing much later, 2nd century AD, but Plutarch's sources are pretty good. Plutarch says that what Claudius Marcellus wanted to do was to show these things to the Roman people so that they would learn how to respect and wonder at the beautiful and marvellous works of the Greeks. The process goes a little step further in 209 BC when Quintus Fabius Maximus captures Tarentum in Magna Graecia. In that city there was a much more than life-size, we don't know how big, much more life-size statue of the god Zeus made by Lysippus. Well, you all know the date of Lysippus, don't you? No, I've forgotten it as well, doesn't really matter. 4th century BC, if I remember rightly. An enormous bronze statue, which Fabius Maximus decides he wants to take back to Rome, because Lysippus is a famous bronze worker. So you can see this change in attitude. He wants to take the statue back so that people at Rome can see something made by Lysippus. It was too big. So what Maximus did was he took a smaller statue back to Rome with him, again by Lysippus, a statue of Hercules, so that this could be placed on display in the very centre of Rome. Next to it was the statue of Fabius Marcellus, of course. You know, I brought this statue back, that type of thing. The real change in attitude seems to come in the early 2nd century BC, and it's really thanks to the Scipios. Several Roman families didn't have any problems with the Greeks. They didn't despise the Greeks or Greek culture. These were families that would learn Greek, they would learn Greek philosophy, they had Greek friends. The Scipios were one of these families. Many of the Scipios learnt Greek, they admired Greek culture, they went to Athens. Well, in 189 BC, Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus, the conqueror of Asia, defeated Antiochus III of Syria at the Battle of Magnesia, which is Manissa in modern Turkey. To celebrate his victory, he took back to Rome with him statues of bronze and marble, but he also took back Greek painters, Greek artists, who made paintings of his victory, which were placed on display. So we're beginning to see here sort of, well, yes, we can show an appreciation of Greek art, and you know, they're not necessarily weak or simple-minded. It's not necessarily a bad thing to like Greek art. And then to celebrate the various victories of the Scipio family, and there's quite a lot of them, he also builds a tomb outside of Rome, a new family tomb, and this contained a newly made sarcophagus, and this is what we have in the textbook, a sarcophagus of Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus. Well, this is what the sarcophagus looks like. Well, who was Barbatus? Well, Barbatus, a member of the Scipio family, who lived roughly about 280 BC. So he's already been dead 100 years. What Scipio Asiaticus does, we think, we don't know for certain, is he builds this new tomb. He reburies all his ancestors in this tomb. He puts them on display in the tomb, if you like. So, for example, this is the only complete sarcophagus that survives, unfortunately. This has got a long inscription on it, recording the achievements of Scipio Barbatus. It was there as a permanent historical record of the family. What's fascinating about this particular sarcophagus is its style. Now remember, in case you've forgotten, sarcophagus is a body swallower. That's what it means. What's particularly interesting about this sarcophagus is that it takes as its model an altar of a style that was popular in Magna Graecia at the time. There is absolutely nothing Roman about this. This is Greek. If you look here, you have these curving parts here, the volutes. These are characteristic of and taken from the Ionic order of architecture. If you look at this part of the sarcophagus, you've got these three raised parts like that, flat parts decorated with rosettes in between. Well, these are the triglyphs, the three parts, and the metopes, taken from the Doric order. So what we see in this sarcophagus, which Ramage and Ramage in the textbook talk about as the first piece of Roman relief sculpture. Whether you believe that is sculpture or not is beside the point. But we do see this very Greek influence. This is the earliest certain example we can say of a Roman being influenced by Greek style in the making of, in this case, this sarcophagus. So you've got this very Greek aspect to it. But it's not on public display, right? It's in a family tomb. It's quite clear from the evidence that Romans were still a little bit careful, didn't want to sort of promote the idea of an appreciation of the visual arts at Rome itself. Outside of Rome, it's a different matter. Outside of Rome, in the Greek-speaking world, statues of people, famous people everywhere. People commission, they pay for art to decorate something. And this what brings us to the first real Roman relief monument. And this is the Aemilius Paulus monument at Delphi. Aemilius Paulus was the general who defeated the Macedonian Greeks at the Battle of Pydna in the year 168 BC or 169 BC, and to celebrate his victory he paid for this monument to be built at Delphi, one of the main centres of Greek culture. So it's not in Rome. He can get away with it because it's not in Rome, it's actually built at Delphi. This is decorated at the top with a frieze, a continuous series of reliefs. Now, reliefs partly carved. These are not freestanding sculptures. This is what we would call a relief frieze. Now, the monument no longer survives. All the stones were taken away to build a Byzantine church, but the relief does. It's very badly damaged. You can see there are large parts of it missing there. And it's quite clearly Greek in its overall style. I mean, you can sort of see this general sort of open spaces, an open background that you find in the Parthenon frieze, for example, much earlier, of course. So it's generally broadly Greek in very many particular ways. But there's one big difference between this and an ordinary, if you can say ordinary, Greek relief frieze. This actually gives us a strip cartoon version of a historical event. Look at this part of the frieze here, which is there. The story is that before the Macedonians and the Romans started the battle, generals from both sides went to see the oracle at the nearby temple. The oracle was asked, who will win the battle tomorrow? The oracle answered, as oracles do, whoever starts the battle will lose the battle. So in the morning they're both standing there watching each other. But then, according to the Roman reports, this is the Roman record of the story, suddenly a horse from the Roman side, without a rider, panicked for some reason. It ran from the Roman side towards the Macedonian side. The Macedonians think this is the beginning of the Roman attack. So they then march forward to attack the Romans, and they lose the battle. Well, that's what we have. This is the riderless horse that's connected to the battle, that's connected to the oracle that says whoever starts the battle will lose the battle. What we have then in the Aemilius Paulus frieze is a record of a historical event. Well, whether it actually happened or not, we don't know, but this is what the Roman story tells us. It tells us of something that actually happened. It tells us by showing us the people involved in the fight. All the men involved in this fight, in the battle scene, are clearly Roman and Macedonian Greek warriors. Here's a Macedonian warrior with his shield. You can just see his helmet there. Here's a Roman soldier with his more square shield. So this is representing a real event. Contrast this with Greek relief friezes. Take, for example, Pergamon, the Gigantomachy frieze from the great altar at Pergamon. The tradition was in Greek, or perhaps we should say Hellenic art, rather than Greek art, to represent history through allegory. In other words, you don't actually show something from history, you use something from mythology to represent something from history. The great altar at Pergamon is believed, generally believed, to have been built sometime about 240 BC to commemorate the victory of the king of Pergamon over the Galatians from Galatia around Ankara. But rather than actually show Pergamon warriors fighting Galatian warriors. It shows us the battle between the gods and the giants. It's something else entirely different. What we see all the time in Greek Hellenic-inspired relief friezes is allegory, a reference to, you have to interpret what the scene means. Normally a scene used in mythology, but you've got to look beyond what the actual scene is. Aemilius Paulus relief is a straightforward statement of a historical event. This changeover, we can't actually say for certain when we really find the first Roman relief sculpture at Rome itself, but we can see the beginnings of a distinctive Roman style in the Aemilius Paulus relief, and as I'll explain later, in Roman tomb paintings of an earlier date. This brings us to the one piece of relief sculpture that everybody accepts has to be Republican in date, from Rome, early Republican. A lot of argument about its date, a lot of confusion about what the pieces actually belong to as well. This is the so-called altar of Domitius Ahenobarbus. The Domiti Ahenobarbi family were very important in Roman politics, and two large sections of frieze were found, I think, in the 17th century. They were believed at that time, for a long time afterwards, to come from an altar that's historically recorded, that was made on behalf of Domitius Ahenobarbus, but we don't know which one, whether it's a late one or an early one or something like that. Well, as we will see, in actual fact, these two friezes belong to a monument that probably commemorate Marcus Antonius, as probably built between 90 and 101 BC. I'll explain why. The two sections of frieze are now in two completely different museums. So the polite way to refer to these, and the correct academic way to refer to these, is to refer to the one section as the Paris relief and the other section as the Munich relief. And they are very different. And learn this, because this will almost certainly come up in an exam. Yes, Wick, make a note. Wick, right, yeah. It's very difficult to take a photograph of either of these. This is the one photograph I've managed to get of the Paris relief. You can't get back far enough, you can't get a wide enough angle, but you get the general idea of it there. The Paris relief can be broken up into two basic scenes. On the left-hand side, you have what we would call the census scene. Now, the census is when you count everybody. Yes, you know that. But the Roman census was taken every year to register the names of Roman citizens who were old enough for military service. And this is fairly certainly what we have on this side. A combination of things point to this. We have, for example, a magistrate or a clerk writing something in a book down there, so much clearer. He's got an older man pointing down to the book for some reason. You've got a woman here and a young boy there. So you can interpret what's going on. You've got two soldiers there. Yes, this is registration for military service. This is the census scene. The magistrate recording the name. Mum saying, I wish you didn't have to go, boy, but I'm afraid you've got to go. And Dad saying, make certain you get it down correctly. Is this the correct interpretation? Well, when we look at the rest of the scene, yes, we can see this is a census scene. The rest of the frieze, the centerpiece, is a sacrifice scene. You've got two musicians here. You've got this larger than the rest figure. In Roman art, the tradition is to show gods and statues as being larger than everybody else. So we can interpret this as a statue or a representation of a god, and we can tell from his armor and his helmet, this has to be Mars. Well, what's happening here is the Suvaturalia. This is the sacrifice in which you have the bull, the sheep, and the pig being taken there. You have a man here about to do the sacrifice, the magistrate in charge of what's going on. These guys who don't have, who are bare-chested, these are the victimari, victimarius, victimari. These are the guys who actually hit the animals on the head with a hammer before their throat is cut. So there's no doubt about what we have here. And then, of course, right at the end, we've got another group of typically Roman soldiers. So the scene is easy to understand. It's recording a historical event. Probably a specific historical event. This is how Roman relief sculpture seems to go. When we look at the Munich relief, we've got something very different. The Munich relief is something taken from Greek mythology. There is absolutely nothing Roman about this. This celebrates the wedding of Amphitrite and Neptune. There's Amphitrite there and Neptune, and they're shown with loads of different sea creatures. You've got a Triton here, you've got a Nereid over there, more and more creatures characteristic of the sea, the Nereid, the winds. You've got little Putti, and look, this enormous tail of this seahorse going there. Everything in this is quite clearly Greek-inspired. In fact, if you look at the sculpture, the way the Tritons are shown, you can see the automatic parallels, the immediate parallels with the Pergamon altar again, which, as you can see here, I've spelt in the Latin way as opposed to the Greek way, just to see if you're keeping an eye on things. You've got the same sort of heavy musculature, full rounded figures. Well, Pergamum was captured, or rather became a Roman province between 133 and 129 BC. And it's clear that Roman artists are interested by this particular art style. But we come back to this little problem, you see. You've got two parts which are believed to be from the same relief monument, carved in two different ways. Well, it's logical to say, are they really from the same monument? They were discovered at the same place. The census relief is carved on white marble. The Amphitrite relief is carved on veined marble. You've got streaks of grey and blue going through it. So you might think that's obvious evidence that they're different monuments. The textbook says that the Amphitrite scene has been taken somewhere else. But no, everybody agrees that they do belong to the same monument. The crucial points are the friezes are exactly the same height, they're exactly the same length, back and front of one monument, and if you look here, the columns that mark the end of each frieze are very clearly Roman Tuscan columns. They belong to a set. So what we have is this rather strange relief then, which doesn't seem to make sense in one way, but we can identify who this monument was probably made for from the combination of the scenes. Marcus Antonius. Well, there are lots of Marcus Antonii, or Mark Antonius if you like, but the Marcus Antonius we're concerned with is the Marcus Antonius who sometime between 100 BC, 1 BC and 90 BC defeated the pirates in the Mediterranean. You can see how a nautical scene would be relevant to him. But he was also censor of Rome, the man in charge of the census. So you can see how these two very different reliefs can be taken together as belonging to the same monument, and basically that monument built in honour of the consul Marcus Antonius, who defeated the pirates, the Cilician pirates, who was censor at Rome. Why the decision was made to have a historical relief one side, the census, and an allegorical relief. The other side, the reference to Neptune and the sea creatures, we don't know. We really don't know. The main point is, of course, that by the beginning of the 1st century BC, the idea of the visual arts is being taken on by Roman people. It's not seen as just a Greek simple-minded thing, a weak thing. We start to see Roman portrait sculptures being made. Portraits of individual people. Where the inspiration for this comes from is debated. By the 1st century BC, Rome has conquered, occupied most of the Greek-speaking areas of the Eastern Mediterranean. They would have seen Greek portrait busts everywhere. A bust, just the top part of the shoulders and the head, so that part. We know that in the 1st century BC, there was a tradition at Rome to make a death mask, a copy of the face of a dead person when they died, to carry this in procession when the person was buried, and then to keep this on display in the house until the next important person died, when another death mask would be taken, and then all the death mask of the family would be taken away in the funeral procession. You see the same type of thing to a certain extent even in relatively modern society, people having paintings made of their ancestors. Oh yes, that's my great-great-grandfather. He was the general who defeated the French at the battle, you know, that type of thing. Imaginary ancestors. People who become rich or famous want to create a background. It's the same type of attitude. Well, we're very fortunate that we do have this one statue from the late 1st century BC, early 1st century AD. How is he dated? He's dated on the style of toga that he's wearing, a very heavy toga. And this shows a gentleman carrying two portrait busts. And we can imagine these are members of his family. They do look rather similar in many ways. They don't look like him. Why not? That's not the original head. It was replaced at a later date. This statue is known as the patrician families, the oldest families at Rome and the most important. These are the guys who would take this type of portrait head in procession with them. What's fascinating is that we see in the patrician statue an emphasis on verism. By verism, I mean verist, true to life. So you've got with these two portrait busts here, you can see sort of, you know, the fat neck on that guy there, you know, sort of with skull and mouth on that one there, no hair whatsoever. These are not idealized Greek-type portraits, these are verist. But what we do find in 1st century Rome is this emphasis on verism. Portraits which show people as they are. This raises a very interesting question, of course, because Rome didn't really have any artists who were trained in making portrait sculpture, so it's more likely that the first sculptors who came to Rome would be Greek, and they were told, I want it to look like me. I don't want it to look idealized. I want them to see the lines in my face and everything. Well, you can see here, I mean, look, sort of, it's not a very flattering portrait, is it? Sort of looking a little bit worried there, looks even more worried than I do. Look at this guy here, sort of sometime 50s or 60s, he's lost all the hair from his head, sort of flabby cheeks, neck muscles getting a bit weak like that, you know. It might be that the Romans do this deliberately because they want to emphasize this air of wisdom that comes with age. Who knows? But let's look at a couple more. Yeah, sort of big fat bulging eyes. Now with that type of sort of bulge underneath the eye, this is somebody who may very well have a heart problem. He may have lots of cholesterol in his bloodstream. That's what often causes that type of thing. But yeah, it's all, Has this man ever smiled? A bit difficult to imagine him smiling. What about him? Oh, I'm so unhappy. You'll never guess what my children are doing now. Yeah, pretty amazing, aren't they? Well, if you think these are pretty extreme. Well, this one probably is a death mask, actually, but made of clay. But look at that one over there. Yeah.
Would these be painted or? Would these be painted or?
We don't know who they are. This is always the problem, of course. But yeah. Anyway, you get verism to a certain extent in female portraiture as well, but it's not so exaggerated. So you have this very famous portrait. It's in the textbook. Of this Republican lady. She's dated by the hairstyle. This is what we call the nodus hairstyle. So she's a woman of mature years, 50 or so, hair brushed back like that, tied up in a bun at the back. She's got these little ringlets at the front there. You know, cheeks are beginning to go down a bit, you know, sort of. You can't have too many facelifts. Your chin might end up by your nose if you're not careful. Anyway, you have to be careful there. But, you know, it doesn't show with wrinkles and everything else like that. But it is pretty veris in many ways. But this idea of verism, this desire by the Romans for verism, takes us into some very strange territory. So I'm going to show you two, not in the textbook, the pseudo-athlete from Delos. This was found in a house that was on the island of Delos that was definitely owned by a Roman citizen. We know that. We think it's a self-portrait. We don't know. But look at that. See, fit, muscular body. But that's hardly an 18 or 20-year-old's face, is it? You know, I mean, this is not... It's a Verres portrait on top of an idealized Hellenic sculpture. And to go one stage further, from Tivoli, not far from Rome, the so-called Tivoli General. Well, look at the Tivoli General. I mean, hey, you know, I'm really fit. I can go out and run a marathon with no problem at all. I've got absolutely super fit body. Yeah, I'm a little bit old. I'm missing his head as well. Got lines there. But, you know, this concept of verism, this desire for verism goes right through into statues as well. Were the Greeks doing the same thing? Well, we'll see in a moment. But what we do see is that this verist approach goes from royal, well, not royal, but leading families, patrician families. It even goes down into families of freedmen, people who've been slaves, and the textbook illustrates this, the tombstone of the family Gessius, and you've got this remarkable portrait of Mama on that side. There's Dad. And there's a young son there. Well, they're not very flattering, are they? They don't look as if they're the most sort of wonderful people in the world. There is an element of fiction here. He's a freedman. He's an ex-slave, but he's shown wearing armour. Well, he could not have served in the army at all. The Greek version, this is mentioned, I think, in the textbook. From Delos, the island of Delos, this bronze head, which in many ways is much more sort of Greek than Roman, the way that the head is twisted, the details of the hair and so forth. But you know, it's beginning to show that Roman verism as well, sort of rather fat, flabby cheeks as well. Well, so much for sculpture. Let's pop on to wall painting. In the textbook, in the chapter we're concerned with, they talk about all four styles of Roman wall painting. I'm not going to do that. It needs to be done chronologically. But I want to start off with, though, with reminding you of the fact that although the Etruscans used lots of wall paintings in their tombs, we don't know for certain about their homes, but certainly in their tombs, there's very little evidence that the Romans did this. The only real evidence is a tomb that was found on the Esquiline Hill in Rome, in which there was a fragment of a painting showing parts of 4 different scenes. We call this the Fabius tomb painting because the name Fabius is written by one of the men, this man here, has the name Farnius written by him. What this painting shows is not a standard Etruscan tomb painting or anything like that, but actually we've got a battle scene, we've got a city surrender scene, we've got these two men. Now notice in this one you can see that Fabius is wearing a long white tunic, something like that. Farnius is bare-chested, bare-legged. This would seem to be Fabius here, again wearing a long white costume, holding a spear. This would seem to be Farnius again. What the painting would seem to show is a Roman general called Fabius taking the surrender of an enemy town from a man called Farnius. You've got the battle scenes, you've got the spear scene, the handshake scene, that type of thing. We do know of a Roman general called Fabius who was very famous in the Samnite Wars. The Samnite Wars against the Samnites of central Italy took place in the 4th century, so we think that this is a painting representing something from the Samnite Wars. Now remember, the Aemilius Paulus relief shows a historical event. So this is something even earlier that's showing what seems to be a historical event. We can't accurately date it. Everything would seem to indicate that it shows a historical event. If we've identified the Fabius properly, then we can roughly date it to 4th century. But then we've got a very long gap. This is the only example we have of a Roman tomb painting from the Roman Republican period. Then we've got a very, very long gap until we get down to the 1st century, or rather the 2nd century BC, when we start to get a lot of evidence, but it's all from Pompeii and Herculaneum. Pompeii and Herculaneum, buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, preserving many of the buildings quite well, with their wall paintings as well. And in the 19th century, a scholar called August Mau analysed all the wall paintings and classified them into 4 distinct styles, mainly on the way that the artist treated the wall as an area to paint. There are lots of arguments about the styles. There are so many overlaps that nobody really likes using these terms anymore, but we still use them because there's no better method. What August Mau identified was that the earliest wall paintings, we call them Roman wall paintings, but they are Pompeii, which is outside Rome. The earliest Roman wall paintings are what we would call the first style. This is Pompeii, the house of Sallust. These are direct copies, basically, of wall paintings that you could see in a Hellenistic town like Priene in southern Turkey. Broad panels of plaster painted as if it's opus quadratum. Each block painted a different colour. It's meant to represent marble. It's to give the idea that this person is rich enough that they can actually afford a wall of marble. So this is very typical first style here. Second style. The first style starts sometime in the 2nd century BC. The second style is thought to date from roughly about 100 BC or so. We see this quite clearly in the House of the Griffins. The difference here is basically you've got this combination of these painted areas which are meant to represent marble, different types of marble, but you're getting architectural details painted in it as well. If you look at this, you see there you've got the base of a column, the column going up, the base of a column going there, and there's an attempt to show perspective. You can see the inner side of that base and the inner side of that base. So it's as if you're looking towards 2 columns and the bases are sticking out like that. This second style also uses a lot of illusion. So this is the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii. You've got painted projecting cornices there, for example. You've also got down here this beautiful three-dimensional effect. It's a representation in paint of something that could be done in marble work. But again, you see you've got these blocks of marble there, you've got these columns that look like they're real columns, but they are most definitely not. The Oplontis Villa, not far from Pompeii, this beautiful sort of painting that shows you a row of columns going away in the distance. The Romans have got the idea of perspective. I mean, they're trying to give you a perspective view there. The Boscoriale Villa is probably the latest of the second style paintings that we really need to look at. This was a villa that was found just outside Pompeii, and the owner decided to sell it with its paintings to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So if you want to see it, you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, complete with its furnishing. Two slightly different photographs in different lights here. But again, you see, emphasizing this illusion aspect. But what we're beginning to find in the later second style is opening up areas. So you're looking out of, you've got this illusionistic architecture, but it's as if you're looking out of a window onto something outside. Again, you've got the columns here done like that. So we're beginning to get the idea of what Roman wall paintings are, but there's still ones that don't quite fit in. This is generally considered to be a second style. Can you see the similarity? No. You've got to read the book. Very happily, there's an English version, but otherwise you have to read it in German. And then you can understand why Mao sort of put this one into this particular classification. The Villa of the mysteries because we don't know what this painting represents. It's in a dining room. But it seemed to show some initiation scene in a sacred sect of some kind, complete with a woman being whipped over there. So, very strange painting altogether. The Odysseus paintings, again mentioned in the textbook. I know time's coming up to an end, so I'm just going to show you this Odysseus painting, based on book 11 and 10, or 10 and 9 of the Odysseus. Shows him with the Laestrygonians, one of these scenes in which he lands on an island somewhere, they throw stones at everybody, and we'll stop at that point. Okay? Time up. So I will still be doing Roman Republic in the next one. Okay, you can go and have a break. Go on, off we go. You don't have to have one.